Hello and welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. I am Nikki and today we are going to be talking about IELTS Writing Part 2. So today we are going to be taking a deep dive into the second part of the IELTS writing. Now this is part of a series of masterclass webinars with the first two already looking at the speaking part 2 and IELTS writing part 1. Okay, so just to let you know that this is going to be about the academic module, not the general training module, which is quite different when it comes to the writing part of the exam. Today, we are going to be analyzing the requirements. We're going to be considering some common errors, identifying some tips and also some pitfalls. And finally, the main aim of these sessions is to increase your confidence when teaching or learning for this high stakes English language exam. So just before we begin our deep dive, a little bit more about me. Why on earth should you listen to me? Okay, so as I said, my name is Nikki Partridge. I am the owner of a language school in Cardiff in the United Kingdom, which is called Pear Tree Languages. I have been teaching for over 20 years and I have been heavily involved in the assessment and teaching of the IELTS for a number of those years. You have my details at the bottom here. It would be great to connect with you. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this exam. So the IELTS writing is 1 hour in total. Task 1, which we looked at in our last masterclass session, is 150 words and should be 20 minutes. Task 2 is 250 words and should take the candidates 40 minutes. Candidates are awarded a band score from 1 to 9. Okay, and a key here is that task 2 is worth a lot more than task 1. Okay, so this is reflected in the number of words that has to be written and also in the timings. So there are 4 bands which are awarded to the candidates for their answer. They are Task Achievement, TA, CC, Coherence and Cohesion, LR, Lexical Resource, and GR, Grammar. Now, don't worry if these are very new to you because we're going to be having a look at what these mean in a little bit more detail towards the end of our session. Okay, if you are already familiar with IELTS writing paper, and this is something that I'm going to come back to during the webinar, you will see at the bottom of IELTS official writing paper 4 little magic boxes, TA, CC, LR, and GR. Okay, so that is where you will find these spaces where the examiner will be awarding grades, a band between 1 and 9 in each of these areas. Now, before we go any further, I would just like to take a pause here and mention our friend General English. When people start to study for the IELTS exam, this is usually because they have a very important reason for doing so. And that reason will be almost certainly crucial to their lives. Maybe they want to study medicine in another country. They want to move to another country. They are trying to get onto a master's or a PhD program. And IELTS is critical for their futures. This is why it's so high stakes. And what this means is very often when we are approached as teachers to teach or tutor a person or a group for IELTS, the candidates, the students are very, very concerned with only studying IELTS, okay? And one of our jobs as teachers, as educators, as practitioners of IELTS is to persuade the student that IELTS is not only about exam skills. IELTS is also about general English. In fact, about 50% of the writing and the speaking, for that matter, is pure general English, LR and GR, grammar. Okay, so I've written those 2 things here. And I've featured here our friend Raymond Murphy with his classic English Grammar in Use book, which I'm sure we are all familiar with. And as I said, it is really important to communicate to your students, showing them the band descriptors. There are 4 band descriptors. 2 of them are general English connected, okay? And if they do not have good general English at a good solid level, it will not be possible for your candidate or for a student to score highly on the IELTS exam, okay? I hope in our discussion we can perhaps go into a little bit more detail about how we can disguise general English into our IELTS lessons. So another point that is absolutely crucial when we are thinking about the IELTS and our students is, first of all, making the correct assessment of the student's level. So what I've written here is that, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, with my years of experience, I believe that students, if they are not level 5.5 and IELTS 5.5, or have general English at a minimum of B1 plus, IELTS is not for them. Okay, there is a possibility of doing IELTS at some kind of foundation level, maybe with some easier materials. There are certainly lots of materials on the market to deal with students who are maybe more like a 4 or a 5, get them introduced to IELTS. But hardcore IELTS practice cannot really happen until a candidate is at least a solid 5.5 or B1 plus on their general English, simply because they will not be able to manage the material. Okay, so IELTS is an exam which is the same exam for every single candidate, whether they're looking for a 6 or they're looking for a 9. Okay, it's the same material. So they have to have the general English level, the overall level, to manage that material. And you making the right assessment of their level from the beginning and setting them on the correct study path is absolutely key, because if they are not on the correct study path, and if you start a student on IELTS material too quickly, they will become demoralized and they may develop a negative attitude towards the exam. The next point about the IELTS, especially part 2 writing, is the importance of critical thinking skills. Okay, and again, I'm sure this topic will come up in our discussion later. This plays a significant role in the second half of the IELTS writing, especially when a candidate is trying to access bands higher than a 6, because without the ability to think critically, to think their way around a question and produce a good, coherent answer that is relevant to the topic and suggests some good ideas with non-specific knowledge, again, it will be extremely difficult for that person to achieve more than a 6. But don't worry, because coming very soon, we are going to have some more workshops exactly on these topics, the topics of making the correct assessment, how to do that, some tools, some advice, and also critical thinking. What is it and how do we start to teach it? So let's get back in now to IELTS Part 2 writing specifically. There are 5 question types. Okay, and I'm just writing, just presenting those, some examples of those here on the screen. The first is an opinion type essay. The second is a discussion type essay. The third is called problems and solutions. The fourth is advantages and disadvantages. And the fifth is what we could perhaps call 2 questions in one. Okay, not a very technical term there, but I think this is a good summary of what we can call this type of IELTS question. So I'm just going to give you a moment, all right, just a moment, a smart minute, just to have a read through these 5 different question types, okay? All right, now we know that the format is exactly the same for all of the different types of questions, okay? So 250 words in 40 minutes, that is always the same. But it is important that you give your students, or if you are a student yourself, lots of practice, okay, of these different types of questions. Because if you give a problems and solutions answer to a opinion essay, okay, it's going to be slightly off. Okay, so the way you answer the question is going to be slightly off, which is going to affect your task achievement score. All right, so let's have a look at an example. Okay, now this is a two questions in one type of question. This is taken from an IELTS in Cambridge English practice test, okay? And it's quite a standard opening statement followed by two separate questions. So what I'm going to do now is, again, just give you 20, 30 seconds just to have a read of that. And then we are going to move on and we are going to have a look at a real sample essay, okay? So a real student who has written a response to this task. If you'd like to take a screenshot of this slide, just so that you've got the question in mind as we go through the next phases of the presentation, which are going to be to look at a real student answer and then to think about how the answer works and perhaps how the answer doesn't work, that would be great. So cameras at the ready, click. So before we actually put pen to paper, we have to think about, what does this candidate need to do now? Okay, so they've seen the question, they've read the question, hopefully they're starting to think about the question, and we want to think about, what are the next steps? Exactly what do they do from this point? They've got 40 minutes, a window of 40 minutes ahead of them. What are they going to do? Okay, the very first thing that they need to do is to analyze, what type of question is it? Okay, what is the question type? What of those 5 types of question types is this one that's in front of me now? And teachers, this is something that you can do as training, of course, in the classes. There are many opportunities to get your hands on real IELTS questions from lots of official sources, Cambridge English, Complete Guide to IELTS, many places. I would avoid the internet, okay, unless it's IELTS.org. To get your hands on question types, simply because it might not be reliable. I've seen many examples of faulty questions, even faulty grammar, faulty spelling in question types. And of course, we want to be training our students with real, authentic material so that when they get into the exam, their experience in the exam is as close as possible to what they will have done in practice. Okay, this is how they're going to be most comfortable. So teachers, you've got a bank of IELTS writing part 2 questions available to you, and you're going to show them to your students and you're going to get them to analyze what kind of question type it is. Okay, next, once they've analyzed the type of question, they will need to do a word shower, an ideas generation. Okay, there are lots of different ways to do this, and this is something that we will come back to have a look at in our critical thinking workshop, and something that we also touched upon in our IELTS speaking part 2, different ways to get students to generate ideas. Okay, sort of a mind mapping exercise. And then once they've got all their ideas and they're pretty sure about what direction their essay is going to take, then they have to structure that response. Okay, so they're going to organize it into different paragraphs. They're going to put their ideas into paragraphs, as I like to call them, little baskets of ideas. Okay, so they'll have their little paragraph of basket of ideas, another little paragraph basket of ideas, making sure there's a central topic to each of those paragraphs, making sure that there is a clear introduction, main body 1, main body 2, maybe main body 3, a very clear conclusion, and making sure that before they even put pen to paper or finger to keypad, if they're doing a computer-based test, that they know the end, where they're going before they even start. So in a way, they kind of looking back on themselves. Because if a candidate simply starts writing, and doesn't have that direction very clear in their mind, they are going to go off topic. They are not going to have coherence and cohesion. They might struggle for ideas during the actual writing phase, and then they're more likely to make mistakes of grammar and of lexis. Okay, so this is what IELTS Masterclass calls think, plan, write. Okay, it's a very simple stage, three-step process. Think, plan, and write. Okay, because if they simply miss out phases 1 and 2 and go straight to the writing phase, that spells disaster. Okay, now remember what we talked about at the beginning. We need to keep in mind task achievement. We need to keep in mind CC, coherence and cohesion. We need to keep in mind lexical resource, and finally grammar. All right. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually look at a real response given with permission by one of my ex-students from a long time ago. And I'm going to give you time to read the response. And as you're reading, I want you to think about those 4 areas. Does it answer the question? Is there task achievement? Is it coherent? Are the paragraphs correct? Okay. Are there relative clauses? How is the lexis? How is the vocabulary? Is it basic? Is there a range? Okay. Are there errors? Are there spelling errors? Are there word choice errors? And finally, the grammar. Okay. The same idea. Are there errors? Is it very basic? Is there any range? Okay. So this is what we're going to be keeping in mind as we go through. Okay, first couple of paragraphs, I'm going to give you a minute. Okay, I'm going to be timing it. Again, you might want to screenshot this. So your 1 minute for reading starts now. Okay, so that is your 1 minute. So what I've done there is I've given you a smart minute. So it is a minute that is time bound. Okay, this is a fantastic technique to use with your students, especially if you use IELTS timings. Now, 1 minute is good because if you think back to IELTS speaking, we're not on speaking today, we're on writing, but all of these skills are all interlinked and they all contribute to the final result. 1 minute is the time that the students have to think about what they're going to say. So if you get your students and yourself used to a minute, okay, that minute starts to feel more instinctive to you. All right, but let's go back to writing. So that was our first minute. You may want to screenshot this, okay, if you haven't already. Okay, your next minute. So now we're looking at the main body paragraphs. Okay, so I'm going to give you another minute just to read through this. So your smart minute starts now. Okay, and again, you might want to screenshot this. All right. And finally, we're going to go ahead to our conclusion. Now, this is very short, so I'm just going to give you 30 seconds. Now, please do keep in mind those four bands, okay? TACCLRGR, okay? Keep those four areas in mind. Your 30 seconds starts now. Okay, everybody. So that was your final 30 seconds to take a look at the conclusion. Again, you might want to do a screenshot. Okay. Now, the reason why this paper is so grainy, all right, maybe a little bit unclear, is because this is a real answer that was written on real paper that we, of course, have scanned and reproduced here. So, I will talk a little bit more at the end about IELTS paper. I also mentioned it in the Task 1 webinar workshop that it's very, very important if your student is going to do the written test, so the handwritten test rather than computer-based, that you start them writing on real IELTS paper as soon as possible so that they get used to the format of the paper. And in that way, they are also able to count the number of words and to check the number of words they are writing visually without actually having to count every word. They will simply go, okay, yeah, I know because I've counted my words many times in practice. I know I can put maybe 10 or 8 words on a line. So I know that I have written enough. Okay, I can feel secure in that because quite simply, not writing enough words is a problem. Okay. All right, so let's think back to this answer that we have just read through. I'd like to start with the things that are good about it, okay? So first of all, there is a good structure, okay? There are clear paragraphs, there is clear progression all the way through the answer. It starts with an introduction, it ends with a conclusion, and there are main body paragraphs which have little baskets of ideas within it, okay? So there are linking words. There are lots of linking words, in fact, on the one hand. On the other hand, there's lots and lots of good linking words there. There has been an attempt at some complex grammar and also lexist throughout. Okay, so there are some very, very nice ideas, and they are expressed well through the language that this person has used. Okay, it's particularly around things like sustainability and environment. So making that link with between buildings and the environment, as well as the historical context, as well as building materials. All of these things are really done well, okay? Also, there is a very good conclusion that brings together all of the ideas, summarizes them, and presents that very clearly. However, there is a one main problem with this essay, and the problem with this essay is that the introduction is very weak. Okay, so at some point, hopefully, when you review this masterclass, you will go back and have the opportunity to have another look or have a look at your screenshots at the introduction. It is very weak. Okay, it doesn't really summarize well the two questions that are being asked. And also the language is a little bit faulty. And this really should be the strongest part of the essay. Reading this essay, I very much get the impression that the candidate got into their stride by the end of the essay. Okay, so by the end of the essay, the candidate was feeling confident and comfortable and had managed to get all their ideas together and had written a really strong conclusion. I wish it could have been the fact that the introduction was as strong as the conclusion was. And really, this is about preparation and making sure that even in the exam context, even when the candidates are very nervous and they just want to start to write because they're worried about the time and they just need to get their ideas out and they just want to finish the exam, they have enough presence of mind because you've given them those skills to really sit down and plan so that the introduction can also be very strong. We want to knock the examiner, okay, with that introduction, so that they really are not left wondering, what is this about? Okay, so what should an introduction contain? Well, first of all, it should have a general statement as the first sentence, which is a kind of a general comment on the topic. It has to address all part of the question or questions in this case, because there are two, so there has to be reference made to those questions. It has to present a clear opinion or position if required. Okay, so if the if the question type asks for an opinion, then it must be given there as well. It also should be a roadmap for the essay. Okay, so it's spelling out what's going to happen throughout the essay, and it should be a maximum of around 50 words. Okay, so ideally around 50 words. And teachers, this is something that you can practice over and over and over again with your students, how to write a good IELTS introduction. Okay, there is a little formula that you can develop with the students for that, with lots of practice. So finally, just before we start to wrap up our masterclass, again, the time seems to fly by. We are going to do the same thing that we have done on the last two masterclass webinars. We are going to try to get into the mind of the examiner, okay? And I'm going to tell you, it really is not that hard, because IELTS has given us this wonderful gift, which are the public band descriptors, okay? So these are publicly available band descriptors. You can get them from the official IELTS.org. And this is basically your guide. This is your map. This is IELTS telling you, if you do this, this is the band you will get, okay? So we're going to have a look at these in a little bit more detail for IELTS Part 2. Okay. The first thing you will probably realize is that I have only included bands 5, 6, and 7 for this in-depth look at this stage. Okay, why is that? Well, the reason is because if we think back to the start of this masterclass, I mentioned that if your candidate is not around a 5.5, they shouldn't even be taking IELTS, okay? So for the moment, for the purposes of today's masterclass, we're going to discard bands, okay, from 1 to 4, and we're just going to start at band 5 as our baseline. Now, I've also stopped at 7. 7 is very often seen as a kind of a magic number in IELTS, okay, for candidates who are really in a high stakes position and they are going to do careers such as maybe medicine or other types of healthcare or veterinary science. Really, 7 and above is where they are aiming, okay? And what people often find very difficult is how to make that jump from 6 to 7. What are the differences between 6 and 7? There are many differences, but I'm going to try to summarize a few of them here when it comes to the writing. And I've included some hearts. Now, I've decided to include hearts this time because I want you to try to get into a positive mindset when it comes to IELTS. Really, we need to love these band descriptors because they are our key. They are our ticket to success. They're the stamp in the passport, okay? If we can understand these band descriptors, we really can unlock success. So where I have put a heart is next to criteria, which I think are especially important to understand. And just before we look at these hearts in a little bit more detail, I want you to keep in mind that the way a candidate moves from 5 to 6, for example, is by achieving every single bullet point in 5. If anything is missing, they cannot go beyond 5, okay? So if anything is missing or wrong, okay, they cannot go beyond that band, even if there are aspects of band 6 that they have as well. Doesn't matter. If everything in band 5 is not satisfied, they cannot move to 6. If everything is 6 is not satisfied, they cannot move to 7. Again, this is publicly available information. Okay, so let's have a look at task achievements, okay? And I put a little heart next to this one. Addresses all parts of the task, this is in 6, by the way, addresses all parts of the task, although some parts may be more fully covered than others, okay? And presents a relevant position, although the conclusions may become unclear or repetitive. So this is very, very important. And this is why very often people will not go beyond a 6 for task achievement, okay? They have to have a position, so a point of view that is clearly expressed and is coherent. It doesn't change, okay? If they don't give the right level of balance to all sides of the argument, then they will not be able to progress beyond a 6, okay? They won't be able to progress up to 7, which is where they address all parts of the task and they present a clear position throughout with the right kinds of levels of extension. Okay, so that is a real key difference there. Let's move on to coherence and cohesion. Let's start at our band 5, and I think this is probably the most important piece of information that you can take from these band descriptors. Take a look at this gem. May not write in paragraphs, or paragraphing may be inadequate. Okay. Let's read between the lines a little bit here. I've told you that if any of these things is not properly satisfied, okay, or there is an error, they cannot move beyond this band. What this means is if a person has not used paragraphing or correct type of paragraphing, they cannot move beyond 5 for CC. And this is where many students, I believe, fall down, because they may get maybe even a 7 for task achievement, then they may get a 6 for grammar, a 6 for lexis, and then they will get a 5 because they just simply didn't write in paragraphs, or the paragraphs were not laid out correctly, or even visually they weren't laid out correctly. They didn't miss a line. You can't get beyond 5. Okay, and then the next point is again in 6 of CC, uses cohesive devices effectively, but cohesion within and or between sentences may be faulty or mechanical. Okay, so they have some linking words, brilliant. They've got some linking sequencing phrases, brilliant. But are they using relative clauses correctly? Does the flow of the answer make sense? All right. Little bit of food for thought there, everybody. Let's have a look at lexical range and grammatical accuracy. So again, I've got my heart because we want to love these IELTS band descriptors. Let's look at number 6, attempts to use less common vocabulary, but with some inaccuracy. This is LR. What this means is they get credit for trying. Okay, so if the candidate tries to use more complex language, even if it's maybe incorrectly spelt, they will still be able to get 6. So you need to encourage your candidates, your students, to try, okay, to be ambitious. Now let's move on to GR, so grammatical range and accuracy. Let's look at number 5. So we've got here, may make frequent grammatical errors, and punctuation may be faulty, causing difficulty for the reader. Now, what this means is if there are frequent errors, now we could be talking about basic errors like missing an S of the third person. We could be talking about articles having them, so underuse, overuse, okay? Or we could be talking about sentences that are just faulty and are kind of hard to understand. Maybe they are backwards, okay? Maybe they've tried to use a passive, but they put it at the front of the sentence instead of at the end. All sorts of reasons. But again, they would not be able to get beyond a 5. And this is where the general English really comes into play. And now if we contrast that with how they get a 7 for grammar, okay, we've got a variety of complex structures, frequent error-free sentences, and a good control with very few errors. So what we're talking about here, reading between the lines, is language that is grammatically very accurate and also has range. Okay, there is a variety of structures and tenses, and although there could be some errors, they are few. Okay, this is again general English, everybody. Right, let's start to take it home, take it to the end. Moving on from the band descriptors, here are my top tips, okay? So teach linking words and structures, but it is not possible to memorize whole answers. Now, we talked a lot about memorization in task 1, whether or not it's useful, how it can be used, etc., or how it shouldn't be used. You can't do that for task 2, okay? You can teach some linking words and structures. It is not possible to memorize whole answers, okay? Even if you have a computer for a brain, it would be absolutely impossible. So you really need to be looking at other types of skills like general English. There is no shortcut with IELTS Task 2 writing. You have to have good general English. You have to have a good range of IELTS vocabulary. They have to have good linking words and structures. Okay, how to do that? So you can use some online tools to build language banks to encourage peer input. Okay, so you could set up all sorts of different, we won't go into them now, that's a whole other world. There are so many different programs out there. If you are online, if you're face-to-face, again, we've talked about having a language box, getting students to explain different words to each other, recycling vocabulary, how to record vocabulary. This is all going to come into play. And also how to make vocabulary transferable. So a little bit, if we think back to that candidate's essay a few slides ago, I mentioned bringing environment into buildings. Okay, so here we have this cross-pollination of topics. All right, so this type of transferable lexis skill is really important. Share the band descriptors with the students. It helps them to construct their answers to fulfill the criteria at the target band. Okay, so if they haven't written in paragraphs, you say, CC, you didn't write paragraphs, so you won't get more than 5 on this. Okay, you can see for yourself, here's your public band descriptors. So this will help them, because then next time they will remember, if I want that 6 or 7 paragraphs is a minimum requirement. All right. I've mentioned it, I'll mention it one more time. Use writing paper, real IELTS writing paper. You can find it at the back of all of the IELTS specimen materials. Okay, so I would strongly suggest using that to control word count. Make all the practice smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound. From the very beginning, you're getting the candidates, the students used to timings. If you're a student, you're self-preparing, you need to be timing yourself very, very strictly. And before we finally wrap up for today, major pitfall. Okay, task 2 is subjective, but it's not an excuse for candidates to deliver a personal narrative or recount a personal tale. Okay, you have to keep in mind that an IELTS task 2 essay is an academic essay. So although the candidates are invited to give examples from personal experience, this is not to tell a tale about the time you went for tea with Auntie Jean. Okay, this has to be, if there are examples, they still have to be abstract. Okay, and they have to be extended but not overly extended, and they must not go into the realms of telling a personal tale. Okay, this will have major implications for task achievement. Do please go to www.ielts.org to find lots and lots of official advice straight from the horse's mouth. You will also be able to download the public band descriptors there, which, as I mentioned, are your real key to success. Okay, so thank you ever so much. Once again, if you would like to access some more useful websites for ELT resources, then you also have the Gallery Teachers workshops available there, with a fantastic workshop library where you will find many, many, many more interesting topics. So the very short and sweet answer to that is yes. So there are 5 main question types in IELTS Task 2 writing, and it is very important for teachers to give students experience of all 5 types of essay questions, okay, and for students to give themselves practice of those. And if there is a question type that a student is struggling with, then of course they should receive some extra practice on that question type. So this question of how teachers can help students who don't really feel that they have ideas to write about is very, very interesting. And this centers really around critical thinking and critical thinking skills, which we are going to be looking at in a separate masterclass workshop. However, a very short answer to that could be you need to experiment with different types of techniques for organizing ideas and for extracting ideas. Okay, so mind mapping, word showers, there are many, many possible techniques. And of course, just encouraging your students to take more interest in the world around them. This question number 3 of how important general English is in IELTS writing is absolutely key to a candidate's success in IELTS. General English is about 50% of the IELTS exam in the writing section and the speaking section. So how important is it? 50% important. Half as important as IELTS skills in general, in my opinion, is general English. So this is an extremely important component of your students' overall readiness to take the IELTS exam.